Hey, it's the Live Well presented by Rapala. That's Ronnie Moore right there. I'm Tommy Sanders, and right now, having passed the halfway point in the season, the Bassmaster Elite Series is taking a march into Alabama for 2 events, and the first one, Ronnie Moore, on the Tennessee River, but a Tennessee River lake we have not been to in almost a decade.
100%, Tommy. You said we're halfway through the season, and all of a sudden we're gonna have 2 in 3 weeks. Then we're gonna have a back-to-back in August, and the season will be done. Wheeler Lake in Alabama, like you said, it's been about 8 years since we've been there for the Bassmaster Elite Series. Back in the 2016 season, we've had opens as recently as last year, but it's always a little different on the Tennessee River. There's a lot of different factors: current flow, how much vegetation there could be. Obviously, if you find that offshore spot where they're heading to or where they're grouped up on, it can absolutely be a phenomenal day for you.
So it could be the summertime pattern for sure, the ledge pattern, and more, right?
Yeah, I talked to our friend Sam George. He's a friend of the program, Bassmaster Opens angler, lives right there near Decatur, Alabama, and he talked about how Wheeler is different than the rest of the Tennessee River lakes because it's kind of like the staging water between the big lakes like Guntersville and Pickwick, and then flowing to Kentucky Lake. So Wilson and Wheeler, those in-between lakes, fluctuate quite a bit with the water. So much rain earlier in the year, higher water levels. He said the one thing it does for fishing, other than water being up in the bushes and then sucked back dry in places, is that it makes these fish act different. They spawn a little later. You could go down the road and catch them off the bed at Guntersville, and they may not spawn heavily at Wheeler right down the road until maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. So a later spawn for some of these fish means we could still have a shallow water bite even though we're going to be mid-June.
A layover, a post-spawn
yes,
bite. Okay.
We could think, if you have some vegetation up shallow, maybe some bushes in the water, you could have some late shad spawn stuff, but honestly, some of these Wheeler fish probably eat on the shad spawn before they actually go and physically spawn because they do it later. So shallow fishing could be a deal if you find an expert shallow angler. He could probably compete if he has something to himself, but it's the Decatur Flats, Tommy. That is a place that it's won most of the time, or you're gonna have a chance to win if you're there. We saw last year in the Open, that was a place where a couple of our leaders ended up fishing and winning the event, but really, we could kind of get a mixture of how that 2016 Elite went with Takahiro.
Be a little more specific. Decatur Flats is like a super ledge, right? A mega ledge.
It is. Bars and ledges, those are the terms on the Tennessee River. Sometimes those deeper ledges that we think about other places, the Decatur Flats has those deep areas for sure that dump out into the main river, but the Decatur Flats also act more like bars, sometimes shallower places. But Sam was mentioning, if you find an angler who gets a section of the Decatur Flats to themselves, maybe a one-cast deal, there's gizzards, shad present, it could be lights out in the first 10, 15 minutes of the day.
We've seen that happen there.
We would love for them to maybe extend their catches throughout the day, Tommy, maybe go
We're
explore.
always pulling for that.
But with the shallow water guys taking all day, they could end up catching up to the weight that some of those Decatur Flats guys do if they have that special spot. But we know how the flats are. Community holes, places that get a lot of pressure, sometimes they don't hold up, or you got first and second place on the same general area, and that could hurt somebody as well.
Compare the pressure that Wheeler gets compared to these more glamorous, let's say, lakes like Guntersville or Pickwick that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I would say that there are a whole lot more tournaments at Guntersville, per capita than Wheeler would be. Wheeler's smaller, and most of the tournaments, it seems like, go out of Ingalls Harbor, right there where our takeoff is. Mid-lake, you're right there by the flats. You could make a run to the dam if you want to catch some smallmouth if you wanted to, especially night tournaments, things like that. But you could also go equally as far the other way to the Elk River. Yeah. So I think that Wheeler gets pressure, but I think in the big scheme of things, it's a little bit more ignored than a Guntersville. So you can probably find an untapped spot on Wheeler a little bit more frequently than you would at Guntersville.
You look back through history, maybe the closest thing date-wise that we've had there with the Elite Series back in 2011, the 3rd week in January, and it was won on a ledge deal with a big worm and a spoon. That could play again this time around.
Yeah,
right?
100%. Some of the bait, I mean, if you're thinking about up shallow fishing, obviously we think about if there's grass present, maybe a topwater like a frog. You're going to obviously see people maybe flipping bushes, swimming a jig. That's going to be something as well, because you can do that and cover water quickly until you dial in where you want to be. For those offshore guys, you're going to see the swim baits come into play. I mean, I think Takahiro dominated with an old Bass Pro Shops swim bait that's not in production anymore. You're going to see some of those line through style, the big soft swim baits, maybe a glide bait possibly, but swim baits should factor. You could also see some maybe Rapala DT 10, 12, 14, that whole array offshore. Jerk baits are still going to factor. Let's face it, Tommy, forward-facing sonar is still going to be a player for some of these, at least knowing where bait location is, knowing where your school may have moved. But with that current flow going, I think that you're going to have to rely more on, changing day to day with the times of the current flow. If they change it from the morning, maybe they run it midday. Being on your spot at the right time with the right bait is going to probably be the most important thing on the flats.
Another history note there, just from last year, most recent event that the Bassmasters has had at Wheeler Lake. Adam Rasmussen, whom you remember had a great classic in Oklahoma, won 3 days of fishing there with about 18 pounds a day. You look at the other historical events there, it's always about 18 pounds a day to win at Wheeler.
Wheeler always kind of gets down-talked like it's not as good as the other lakes. It is hard for a lake to average 20-plus pounds for 3- and 4-day tournaments in the big scheme of things, especially 200-plus boat tournaments like the Bassmaster Open. So 18 a day, nothing to shake a stick at. I'd expect us to be at least in that range. But we know, as we've seen the last couple of elites, there could be someone jump out and dominate, but as we've seen the last few years of the elites, we've seen the winning weights go up. So I wouldn't be surprised, if it ends up being 80 pounds, 20 a day at least, wouldn't be surprised one bit.
Keep your fingers crossed. I hope it's close this time.
Yeah, exactly.
we need a good close one. That would be good. The
know.
Whataburger Bassmaster Elite at Wheeler Lake in Alabama, June 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. It's coverage right here on Bassmaster.com and also on the weekend on FS1.